All right, thanks everybody. Happy to be here talking about Terraformation. I helped start the company 4 years ago. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from around here. I grew up in California and was busy in the tech sector, doing startups and working at tech companies for like 25 years before kind of growing a conscience, I guess, or having a moment of consciousness in 2019 and deciding to switch all of my time and effort over into climate. So Terraformation is a company that grows forests. We do so at global scale, and we try to focus on native and biodiverse forest restoration in places all around the world that have degraded and desertified lands that can be reforested. And our business model is to sell nature-based carbon credits. And maybe unlike some of the folks presenting downstairs, I'm not here raising money today or anything. Just here to talk about forestry and what the unit economics of forestry are, and hopefully folks leave today with a better sense of what the economic opportunity is around carbon credits and native forestry. And so Terraformation's track record, I mean, over the last 4 years, we've started 33 forests in many countries around the world, whether it's Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, Indonesia, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Brazil. I mean, just we've tried to operate on as many continents as possible, and basically following the lead of scientists who tell us what are the right target zones for native and biodiverse reforestation. And the thing that we do, the intervention that we introduce into those areas, is to run a forestry accelerator. So we train new teams, and they come to us usually in a very early stage, pre-feasibility, pre-carbon PDD. These are teams that have worked in conservation or agroforestry or agriculture or ranching, some land use practice or some land use business. They've heard about carbon forestry and they want to switch over into it. And so our team trains them, we source them, vet them, train them, finance them for the early stages of their project build out, and then help them raise scale up capital. We've done this with many partners, and as I said, in every continent around the world. Okay, the meat of what the message that I want to leave for everybody today, though, is that this is not just something to do out of the goodness of our hearts. This is not just something to do because it's good for climate. It's actually like a good and sound business to operate. And the fundamentals of the business model are as follows. First, you got to look at the types of trees, the species that you're working with. Different terrestrial species or different blue carbon or blue restoration species have different types of carbon sequestration curves. So generally our team works with botanists and soil scientists to try to understand what the carbon sequestration is, the potential is for each species that we work with or that we introduce into a site. But in general, right, if you look at all of these carbon sequestration curves, you can see that they kind of start small, right? Makes sense. You've got like a little tiny seedling in the ground. Its total trunk volume is not very high initially. It'll go through a 15 or 20 year maturation cycle during which carbon sequestration is growing. It'll peak as that plant reaches maturity, and then it'll kind of level off, right, as the plant fills out. But these curves are long. They'll go for like 40 years, and they just have that hump around 15 or 20 years and before kind of leveling off. So for a hypothetical 5,000 hectare project, if you multiply that out by the number of plants that a 5,000 hectare project would support, you can come up with some pretty like large numbers, right? Like you'll peak out sequestering 60 to 70,000 tons at peak year on that plot of land, and that's a very durable result, right? Like if you're working with millions of plants that are growing on this operational 5,000 hectare plot, the law of averages of large numbers really works in your favor. So some of those plants will do well, some of them won't, some of them will grow faster than average, but the curve is quite durable for carbon sequestration. If you're running a commercial carbon project, you'll always be asked to hold a buffer for safety, and whether it's enforced by like Vera, a carbon standards body, or whether it's just done for your own self-insurance purposes, right? Like you want to buffer how much carbon insurance or how much carbon you're selling. And so what we do is we take 20% off. You can take the total carbon sequestration curve and just decrement by 20%, and then sell that area in dark green underneath, so 80% of total carbon sequestration is monetizable, is what I would say. And then you want to compare that, that's your revenue, and you want to compare that against your costs, right? And costs can vary widely, right? Depending on if you're working with mangrove, where it's just, send somebody out with a bag of seedlings and they're just throwing them into the surf. That's a, $1,000 a hectare to quote unquote just plant, right? You're just throwing seeds out into the coastline, versus $4,000 would be like a terrestrial reforestation project where you literally have teams of people out there with spades and shovels and equipment and potentially dragging, water buckets to actually irrigate each new seedling, et cetera, right? So, but between $1,000 and $4,000 per hectare is a pretty reasonable range, or that's a wide enough range. You'll capture just about all the reforestation projects on planet Earth within that range. Now, really important here is what is the price per ton of carbon credits that you're selling into the market. All the market analysts would tell you that the price per ton is going up over time. We don't know exactly what that's going to end up being, because there's a very wide range of estimates. Some people are saying it's going to be like $200 a ton by like 2030. Other people are saying, yeah, it'll be like a 3% CAGR, right? But if you take like a conservative estimate, right, I've modeled a 6% compound annual growth rate here and run hundreds of thousands of Monte Carlo simulations to generate this curve, right? This is the revenue curve that you might expect to see from carbon credits over the next 40 years, like during the duration of one of these projects. So you take your monetizable carbon credits issuance, you multiply by the carbon price per ton, and you get a revenue curve that looks like this, peaking out at around $5 million and being pretty steady, actually, for the majority of project time. It starts off thin, right, again, because your carbon issuance is small in the beginning, but as it grows, even as a project gets over its peak carbon sequestration curve, you've got rising carbon prices during those later years, and so a pretty stable revenue creation engine is, you can think of a forest, really. It's like a pretty stable revenue generator. So these are the unit economics of forestry, right? For a 5,000 hectare project, even if you're on the high end, the conservative end of project costs, $3,000 to $4,000 per hectare, that means $15 to $20 million of all-in project development costs for a new 5,000 hectare forest. The area under curve here is $110 to $120 million. So these are very, very profitable projects to invest in. The key thing here, and this is why I think so many projects kind of run into trouble, is the time duration. You got to have some really patient investors who are willing to make a 40-year bet, right, on this very profitable thing. But that's ultimately what Terraformation, and I think a lot of forest restoration companies who are working with carbon credits as their business model, this is the fundamental dynamic that's driving all of those businesses. So yeah, 15 to 20 in, 110 to 120 out, right, as revenue. It's a really profitable thing to do, but you got to have the time duration and the time matching capacity to capture that revenue. And that's why we would say, right, like restoration is the most immediately scalable opportunity. There's no other carbon sequestration technology, whether it's direct air carbon capture fans or phytoplankton blooms or limestone weathering, whatever, right, that has this style of unit economics. And that's what Terraformation is doing. That's it. Happy to take questions if anybody has anything.